Chapter 3. Elizabeth could not, for any inducement, come to a conclusion on what manner of man Mr. Darcy was. When he had called at the parsonage yesterday, he had been amiable and polite. He had even inquired after her sister, and offered to reunite Jane with Mr. Bingley. Yet he had stood so aloof in Hertfordshire, silent and grave, often casting a disparaging eye on his surroundings. Added to that, there were also Mr. Wickham's claims of Darcy's ill-treatment to consider. How she wished that Jane were here to discuss the matter. Charlotte was a dear friend, but she was not Jane. Therefore, there was little that could be done, aside from pondering and observing, which would have been easier to do last evening if Colonel Fitzwilliam had allowed it. The Colonel was a pleasant gentleman, and having an amiable gentleman, who also happened to be the second son of an earl, flirting with you, was not disagreeable, unless you desired peace to order your thinking. It was also not helpful that the agreeable and engaging Mr. Darcy from the afternoon's call had been replaced by the scowling and sullen gentleman she had often encountered in Hertfordshire. Elizabeth paced a circle around a bench at the far edge of Rosings' garden. Thanks to Colonel Fitzwilliam and Mr. Collins, Lady Catherine had learned last evening that Elizabeth enjoyed walking, and had insisted that her morning constitutional include a tour of Rosings' gardens. Elizabeth had tried to refuse, but it was not to be. Mr. Collins would not hear of it, and having both Lady Catherine and Mr. Collins put out with her was not something Elizabeth wished to endure. She made one last turn around the bench before taking a seat. She had to admit that the view from here was spectacular. From this particular spot she could see down a soft incline to a pond and a folly beyond. A bird hopped out from under a bush, catching her attention for a moment before she looked back toward the folly. Tomorrow she would have to venture to it. Miss Bennet. Elizabeth jumped at the sound of her name. "I do apologise for startling you. It was not my intent." Anne de Bourgh took a seat next to Elizabeth. "This is my favourite prospect." "It is lovely." Elizabeth could easily see why this would be a favourite view. "I have tried to capture it many times," Anne said, "but I fear my skills are not what they should be." She laid the notebook she was hugging to her chest on the bench. "Mother had someone in to teach me, but I would have excelled more had I been exposed to the masters in town." She shifted so that she was turned slightly toward Elizabeth and away from the folly. "However, my health is best in the country. The foul air of town is draining. It is so hard to breathe there." "The air is rather stale at times," Elizabeth agreed. Anne laughed. "You're too polite. The air is vile, which is why I will never live there." She smiled at Elizabeth. "In fact, I intend never to leave Kent. I would dislike being any distance from my mother. She and Mr. James, the apothecary, know best how to help me when I become ill. I would trust none other." Elizabeth's brow furrowed. Were not Mr. Bourgh and Mr. Darcy betrothed? How would she be able to stay in Kent once she married Mr. Darcy? Elizabeth placed a hand on her heart as it pinched with sadness. It was strange that it should hurt just now. She attempted to focus her attention on the view before her, but her curiosity would not be quelled without knowing the answer to her questions. "Forgive me if I'm impertinent, but are you not betrothed to Mr. Darcy?" Elizabeth asked. The strange, sad pinching repeated itself. "You have heard of that?" Anne asked in surprise. "I have," Elizabeth admitted. Anne sighed and smiled. "From Mr. Collins, most likely." "Yes, he was one source." Elizabeth bit her lip. She should have just acknowledged the truth of Mr. Bourgh's statement with a simple yes. There was no need to bring up the fact that she had listened to Mr. Wickham's tales, and yet that seemed to be exactly what she was doing. "And the other?" Anne's eyes were wide with interest. "It was someone who claims a long acquaintance with Mr. Darcy," she replied. But it was not enough of an answer. Mr. Bourgh waited expectantly for a name. Elizabeth looked down at her hands, embarrassment stealing its way across her cheeks. "Mr. Wickham," she admitted. "That scoundrel," declared Mr. Bourgh. "It is best not to believe more than half the words that come from his mouth." Elizabeth could not contain her shock. He seemed charming. Anne laughed bitterly. "Oh, he is charming. He will charm a lady right out of her stays and stockings and leave her smiling, until she realizes he will not be returning, unless she has a fortune, of course. Then he will return. But it will not be for her. It will be for the gold in her possession." Elizabeth gasped. "I assure you, it is true. I cannot give particulars, but rest assured, he is no friend of Darcy's, not any longer at least." Elizabeth did not know what to say. She had been so certain that Wickham was trustworthy. He had smiled and whispered in such a believable way. "Why Darcy did not run that blackguard through for his treachery I do not know," continued Anne. "If I were a man and had been so ill-used, I would have." Elizabeth shook her head. Mr. Borg's words did not match at all with what Elizabeth had heard from Mr. Wickham. "Mr. Darcy was ill-used?" she asked. "Not Mr. Wickham." She wrapped an arm around her stomach, which was turning most unpleasantly, and tears gathered along the rims of her eyes. If what Mr. Bore was telling her was true, she had been most assuredly fooled. Mr. Wickham had spoken so firmly, so clearly, so lacking in anything but assurance that his story was correct. Anne's expression softened as she took in Elizabeth's state of shock. "Mr. Wickham is a master storyteller, is he not?" Elizabeth nodded and blinked, but instead of dispersing her tears, the action caused one to roll down her cheek. "I would tell you the true tale," Anne said, "but Darcy might not approve. It is his story to tell, after all, and of a delicate nature." As Elizabeth wiped at the offending tear, her mind returned to her original question. "You're not betrothed to Mr. Darcy?" Anne smiled and picked up her notebook. "He has never asked, and I have never accepted." "Would you?" The question escaped Elizabeth before she could think better of it. Why she felt compelled to know this bit of information she did not know. Curiosity, she supposed. She had always been a curious creature. Anne shook her head. "No, he has homes in London and in Derbyshire. Neither is close to Rosings." She took a pencil out of her reticule. "And I do not love him. I would prefer a love match." Elizabeth did not know what to think. The world seemed to be standing on its head. Mr. Wickham was a scoundrel who had used Darcy poorly. Mr. Bore was not betrothed to Mr. Darcy. Mr. Darcy seemed genuinely concerned with Jane's well-being. None of these things supported any of her previous suppositions. "It is most startling," she muttered, as Mr. Bore looked at her surreptitiously. "I suppose it is." Anne turned her focus back to the view in front of her, and applied herself to her drawing. Elizabeth sighed, her shoulders drooping under the weight of these new revelations and what they said about her ability to judge character. Most often, her evaluation of a person was accurate. Had she not deemed Mr. Walters a cad and a gambler? And had he not proven to be such? Had she not declared Miss Palmer to be the only lady worthy of the parish rector's affections? And had she not turned out to be precisely the best woman to fill the position of parson's wife? Was Miss Palmer not now the most compassionate person to all those who called at the parsonage with a need? So why was Elizabeth now stumbling so seriously in her abilities to decipher character? It was humiliating, really, to be so very wrong. Elizabeth refused to ponder it further, for if she were to start by admitting that she had been incorrect about Mr. Darcy and Mr. Wickham, she would then have to evaluate her actions towards each gentleman. And if being wrong in one's estimation of another's character was humiliating, viewing your poor behaviour based on that estimation was thoroughly shameful. Elizabeth remained silently on the bench next to Mr. Bore for a full 5 more uneasy minutes before excusing herself and beginning her walk back to the parsonage. As she rounded a turn in the grove, she came to a full stop. Mr. Borg had not said that everything Mr. Wickham said was to be discounted. Surely there must be some small portion of truth in what Mr. Wickham said that made his story plausible. As she continued walking, she reviewed all that Mr. Wickham had told her. Mr. Wickham had claimed Mr. Darcy to be both proud in his actions toward others and cruel in withholding a living. Now she wondered if perhaps the living had been withheld because of whatever had happened between them. Not that such a fact did Mr. Darcy any credit. A vengeful spirit was not complimentary to a gentleman. But it was possible that Mr. Darcy had given the living to another, as a reprisal for whatever wrong Mr. Wickham had committed. Next, she considered the greeting she had observed between the two gentlemen when they had met in Hertfordshire. It had been unpleasant at best. In fact, it had seemed rather filled with loathing. And she, herself, knew from that first assembly that Mr. Darcy could be very haughty and even rude. These facts were also not credits to Mr. Darcy's character. She paused before exiting the grove and returning to the parsonage. The whole of Mr. Wickham's story must be built on the general disagreeableness of Mr. Darcy's personality, and his unwillingness to restore a person to favour once his good opinion had been lost. If it were not true that Mr. Darcy was arrogant, and had Mr. Darcy's actions in Hertfordshire been more unpretentious, not a word of Mr. Wickham's story would be believable. She smiled, relieved that she had finally deciphered something about the man from Derbyshire, and that she had not been entirely wrong in her assessment of him. He was proud and arrogant. That remained true. She bit her lip as a pang of something stabbed at her heart. It did remain true, did it not? She shook her head. It would not do to be so wavering. She would leave room to shift her opinion if it became obvious that it was not correct. But for now, she would hold to her assessment. Mr. Darcy was proud and arrogant. This was, after all, based not only on the words of Mr. Wickham, but also on Mr. Darcy's actions. Had he not slighted her most grievously? Had he not worn a disdainful look frequently? Yes, she told herself, rubbing softly at her heart, it must be true.